Inclusion. The easiest way to break down inclusion is to think of the word include. Inclusion regarding individuals with disabilities and special education secures opportunities for students with disabilities to learn alongside their non-disabled peers in general education classrooms. These students are included. Creating a successful inclusive classroom varies in complexity, based upon challenges created by the disability at hand. However, a knowledgeable approach in instructional practices and positive attitudes on parts of the teachers proves vital in triumphing over any obstacle which may emerge within the classroom. My name is Shelby Oakley, and I'm a graduate student at Georgetown College. I will be presenting my research capstone project as part of the completion of my master's degree. I am also a high school special education teacher in the Kentucky school system. I have my bachelor's in learning behavior disorders and am completing my master's in moderate to severe disabilities. I have taught students with learning behavior disorders and have collaborated with numerous general education teachers for the past 4 years. This is my second year teaching students with moderate to severe disabilities. I am our school district's MSD coach. I lead our MSD PLCs, and I am also the team leader for our College and Career Readiness Action Plan Committee. Throughout these past 4 years, I have worked side by side numerous teachers and talked to them about their views on inclusion of students with disabilities and the effects inclusion has on their instructional practices. A part of my professional growth plan is to continue to research inclusive strategies to help in collaboration with general education teachers in our school. For many years, the inclusion of students with special needs in the general education classroom has been a major topic of discussion. Inclusive education means that all students are part of the school community, regardless of their strengths and weaknesses. These students with disabilities deserve to have full access to all resources and social interactions that are present in the general education classroom. However, many teachers lack the knowledge of how to teach students with special needs, and therefore their attitude towards inclusion and their instructional practices can be impacted. The purpose of this study is to examine attitudes of general education and special education teachers on the subject of inclusion and how their views impact their instructional practices in the classroom. The question being researched is, what are high school teachers' attitudes towards the inclusion of students with disabilities, and how are their instructional practices affected by these views? Before we begin, we must know what inclusion is. Inclusion is defined as an educational approach providing the students with special needs education in the regular classrooms, which are the least restrictive educational environments for them, also known as the LRE. The inclusion of students with disabilities in the general education classroom is a current legal requirement in the United States according to the nation's special education law, identified as Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA. In an inclusive classroom, special education students are allowed to develop both socially and academically to maximize their growth opportunities. Inclusion is more than allowing students to be present in a classroom. According to Making Inclusion Work in General Education Classrooms, inclusion secures opportunities for students with disabilities to learn alongside their non-disabled peers in general education classrooms. A successful inclusive classroom varies in complexity, and it is based solely on the difficulties and challenges created by the disabilities within that specific classroom. Adaptations, accommodations, and modifications. According to IDEA, students with special needs have the right to receive necessary curricular adaptations. Adaptations include accommodations and modifications. Students who receive accommodations are held to the same academic expectations as their general education peers. On the other hand, modifications entail making changes that lower these expectations. Curricular adaptations vary based upon each student's individualized education plan, also known as an IEP. The general education teacher and the special education teacher. Many teachers have a low self-confidence level when it comes to educating students with special needs. As a result, many general education teachers believe inclusion is extra problems and work in their classrooms, which in turn has no positive impact on the student with special needs. Negative attitudes towards the inclusion of students with disabilities are the largest indicator of failure of inclusion. Integrating students with disabilities into general education classrooms is very complex, which can make the inclusion process seem intimidating or overwhelming to a general education teacher. But if a general education teacher has a knowledgeable approach and a positive attitude, they will be able to handle any obstacles they encounter in the classroom. A knowledgeable approach proves vital to a thriving inclusive environment. According to Algonza in 2012, there are two types of inclusion that have been scientifically proven to be effective in a classroom setting: co-teaching and the collaborative consultation model. The first type of inclusion is the co-teacher model. The co-teacher model takes collaboration within a general education classroom with the accompaniment of a special education teacher. A successful co-teaching environment clarifies assignments, emphasizes critical and creative thinking while engaging all students by providing a balance of accommodations to enhance learning for all students regardless of whether or not they have a disability. The second type of effective inclusion is the collaborative consultation model. Consultation is defined as a voluntary, interactive process that enables people with diverse expertise to generate creative solutions to mutually defined problems. The collaborative consultation model allows special education teachers to help coach general education teachers to design specific instruction that provides accommodations to help struggling students succeed. Professional development. Many studies, such as McCrae and McHatton 2011, Luther 2013, and Huberman 2012, have shown that the best way to help teachers learn about their role in inclusion is through professional development, also known as PD. Technology was used in a variety of ways throughout this data collection. Technology was used to conduct research for the literature reviews, for collaboration with peers and professors, for communication with colleagues to obtain consent to conduct interviews, to determine an appropriate interview time for the participants, in collecting and analyzing the data with the use of Google Forms and Microsoft Word, to color code using Microsoft Word to determine themes for the literature review, to store documents and keep track of documents for the literature review, to protect subjects' data and follow the school's acceptable use policy, as well as to destroy data appropriately. The research method used was action research using a triangulation mixed methods design for collection of data to help assure validity in the data. The research methodology consisted of quantitative and qualitative data collection. Interviews and surveys were conducted to gain input on the inclusion of special needs students in the general education classroom and the effects inclusion has on the teacher's instructional practices. The interview and survey data was collected through a Google form. The quantitative and qualitative research is appropriate for this study because we will be able to determine whether fellow faculty members have a negative attitude towards inclusion of the special education population and the effects it has on their instructional practices. The research question. As a special education teacher in a large high school with a surplus of new teacher hires, it has been brought to my attention how teachers feel about inclusion. The inclusion of special needs students is very important because these students will be mainstreamed into society once they exit high school. The more positive teachers' attitudes are towards inclusion will help special needs students become a more pivotal part of society and their communities. The question to be answered is, what are high school teachers' attitudes towards the inclusion of students with disabilities, and how are their instructional practices affected by these views? Participants included general education and special education teachers from the state of Kentucky that worked in a public school setting. These individuals were chosen by department chairs within a school system. The high school is broken down into 5 departments. Each department chair selected 4 individuals, 3 general education teachers and 1 special education teacher. They were asked to schedule an interview time and to complete a survey. There were a total of 15 general education teachers and 5 special education teachers that participated. The teachers were equally represented by making sure each of the departments had participating members in the given interviews and surveys. Data collection. Data collection started after the approval of the IRB committee from our research project. I met with department chairs to determine potential participants. Once determined, I sent out an email asking for their willingness to complete an interview and a survey. Within the email was a link to the letter of consent that all participants were asked to sign. The surveys and the interviews were completed at the same time to ensure the participants' time was considered and managed appropriately. The survey consisted of 7 questions, while the interviews consisted of 3 questions. The interview responses were input into a Google form, which ensured the participant's identity remained unknown. After the interviews and surveys were all conducted, the researcher could easily analyze and synthesize the data through the use of technology. Examples of survey questions: have you ever taught an inclusive setting with special education students? Yes, no, other. Example of interview questions: how does your view on inclusion affect your instructional practices? These answers were more in depth. Data analyzing techniques. Google Forms was used to collect Google Forms was used to collect the answers to the survey and interview questions. 7 survey questions with yes, no, or other answers, and 3 interview questions which were input into a Google form. The survey questions helped determine the participant's background, while interview questions helped allow themes to be developed with the literature. Data from the interviews was placed into Microsoft Word and then analyzed using line-by-line analysis and a color coding system to record themes relevant to the literature and results found in the surveys. Graphs were then developed to display the data appropriately. Example of Google Form data collection. Do you feel comfortable implementing accommodations and modifications in your classroom for special education students? And the data was displayed appropriately. After compiling the data from the interviews, the results yielded that 80% of the participants were female and 20% were male. 50% of the participants have taught longer than 10 years. This leaves the other half of the participants being relatively new teachers. The majority of the teachers received a special education class while attending college, with 15% having not taken any special education courses in their college career. 80% of the teachers had taught in a classroom with special needs students. This number reflects that the vast majority of teachers have taught in an inclusive classroom setting because IDEA mandates that special education students be placed in their LRE, their least restrictive environment, by mainstreaming with similar age peers. 75% of the teachers felt comfortable implementing accommodations and modifications to a special needs student's ability level. 85% of teachers felt it would be beneficial to attend a professional development over inclusion. 90% of the teachers had a positive attitude towards inclusion of special needs students. The interviews conducted obtained qualitative data. Qualitative research is a form of inquiry that analyzes information conveyed through language and behavior in natural settings. It is used to capture expressive information not conveyed in quantitative data about beliefs, values, feelings, and motivations that underlie behaviors. When collecting qualitative data, you analyze the information to determine a theme, and you paint a picture based off of that information. According to Holliday 2002, an important criterion for good data is the degree to which it provides the potential for thick description by revealing different, deeper aspects of the occurrence being studied. The majority of the teachers made mention that they do not feel they have the right tools to modify and accommodate special needs students in their classroom. They feel as though a professional development would help them enhance their understanding of inclusion. Even though the teachers felt inadequate about how to best implement strategies, their overall attitude towards inclusion was positive. Overall, the teachers concluded that inclusion is good for the students as long as we set high expectations, provide the appropriate accommodations to the student, and the number of special education students in a class is manageable for the teacher. The teachers all show the social benefits of inclusion for students with special needs. Some teachers felt that inclusion negatively affects their instructional practices due to more work on the general education teacher, lack of collaboration from the special education teacher, the slowing down of the pace of the overall class, and the ability of the general education teacher to determine how a student with special needs learns. All of the teachers listed multiple adjustments they have made to their instruction due to students with special needs, such as modified tests and assignments, limiting choices, shortening assignments, allowing retakes, varied due dates, group work, one-on-one, pulling for tests, paraphrasing, reader, extended time, encouraging students to be their own advocates for accommodations, eliminating program standards, teaching at a slower pace, reteaching, chunking, printed notes, copy of notes, extra notes, fill-in-the-blank notes, guided notes, scheduled readers with special education teacher, send to the special education teacher, extra time explaining material, and additional review of material. The majority of the teachers made mention that they do not feel they have the right tools to modify and accommodate special needs students in their classroom. 90% of the teachers had a positive attitude towards inclusion. Although the majority of the participants had a positive perception towards inclusion, almost all felt it was necessary to have a professional development over the implementation of inclusion to obtain those tools that they felt like they were lacking. A PD course would allow teachers to become more aware of how to manage their inclusive classrooms and to become more confident in their teaching practices. Results connected to literature. So, inclusion in the classroom, there was literature found that discussed that co-teaching models takes collaboration within a general education classroom with accompaniment of the special education teacher. Results from the data suggested that some teachers felt there was a lack of collaboration from the special education teachers. But within a co-teaching model, you're supposed to have this general education and the special education teacher working together. Literature also said that the collaborative consultation model allowed the special education teacher to help coach the general education teachers to design specific instruction that provides accommodations to help struggling students succeed. Well, results from the data said that some teachers felt they lacked the tools to determine how to help a student with special needs learn. Well, this is where the collaborative consultation model would come into play, where the special education teacher would coach that general education teacher. Teacher attitudes and effects on instructional practices. According to Gokira 2012, many teachers have a low self-confidence level when it comes to educating students with special needs. Results from the data said that some teachers felt they lacked the ability to determine how a student with special needs learns. So they don't have the information, they don't have that high confidence level because they don't know enough about the student or the student's needs to be able to accommodate those students. Literature also suggested from the same journal, many general education teachers believe inclusion is extra problems and work in their classrooms, which in turn has no positive impact on the student with special needs. Results from the data said that some teachers reported that inclusion negatively affects their instructional practices due to the increased work on the general education teacher. So they felt like, as a general education teacher, that they had more work to do due to having students with special needs within their classroom. Literature from MATL 2013 journal said that negative attitudes are the largest indicator in failure of inclusion. meaning that if you have a negative attitude, inclusion is not going to be successful. Results from the data said that some teachers felt the overall class pace was slowed down due to inclusion. Well, if they feel like their class pace is being slowed down, they're not going to view that class positively, and therefore the inclusion could fail. Professional development. According to Luther, Rickman, and Shady 2013, a study showed that after a PD over inclusion, over half, 55% of the teachers felt more comfortable with accommodating students with special needs. Results from my data said that majority of the teachers made mention that they do not feel they have the right tools to modify and accommodate special needs students in their classroom. Professional development opportunities would enhance their understanding of inclusion and provide them with the appropriate tools needed to create a successful, inclusive environment. So they supported the idea of having a professional development, which I found very interesting. Conclusions and implications for future research. My research, again, was what are high school teachers' attitudes towards the inclusion of students with disabilities, and how are their instructional practices affected by these views? Based on this study, the majority of high school teachers have a positive attitude towards inclusion of students with disabilities. Overall, the teachers concluded that inclusion is good for the student as long as high expectations are set, appropriate accommodations are given, and the teacher-to-student ratio is manageable for the teacher. Some teachers felt that inclusion negatively affects their instructional practices due to the increased workload, lack of collaboration from the special education teacher, and the lack of knowledge and the lack of knowledge on student disabilities and their unique needs. The action plan moving forward. With proper guidance from trained professionals, teachers can have a positive impact and positive interactions with special education students. This study has the potential to impact my own school, which I'm very excited about. I plan to propose at our district MSD PLC meeting for the special education teachers to take action in educating not only ourselves, but the general education teachers in our school district on inclusion, as well as providing them with the tools and knowledgeable approaches to implement in their instructional practices to make their inclusive classrooms successful. Based on the literature and data collection, professional development courses can help teachers learn how to be better informed on inclusion and develop knowledgeable approaches and implementation of accommodations and modifications in their instructional practices. In the future, studies over professional developments needs to be analyzed and recorded to determine their effectiveness in providing tools for teachers to implement in their classroom. I would also encourage research to be conducted to determine the percentage of teachers that would implement the tools that they obtained from that said professional development to make sure that it is being effective. As a special education teacher, it is a part of my profession to be an advocate for students with disabilities. Each year, I choose a professional area to grow in that will allow me to become a better educator, but also that will allow me to better advocate for my students with disabilities. When looking at this research, I realized that to ensure my students are successful, my school needs to be successful. I take this as a challenge to better educate myself so I can help my colleagues and school grow into an accepting, inclusive environment where students with disabilities are acknowledged and instructional practices thrive. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I look forward to hearing from you.